The Galactic Empire. Thought the jungle was just trees. Part 1. Commander Zexathara adjusted his crimson battle armor as the transport ship descended through the thick atmosphere of the unnamed planet. The Caltherian Empire had conquered over 3,000 worlds in the past century, and this small blue-green sphere would be just another easy addition to their vast domain. According to their scouts, the planet contained only primitive life forms and dense vegetation. No advanced civilizations, no technology, no resistance. "Prepare for landing," announced the ship's AI in the melodic tones of the Caltherian language. Through the viewport, Zexathara could see endless stretches of green jungle canopy stretching to every horizon. The trees were massive, some reaching heights that dwarfed even the tallest structures on their homeworld. But trees were just trees, no matter how large. The landing party consisted of 50 elite Caltherian warriors, each equipped with plasma rifles, energy shields, and combat armor that could withstand direct hits from most known weapons. They had conquered civilizations with technology far more advanced than anything this primitive world could offer. The mission was simple: establish a forward base, survey the planet's resources, and prepare for full colonization. As the transport touched down in a clearing, Zexathara felt the familiar rush of another easy victory. The Caltherians were 7 feet tall, with natural exoskeletons that made them incredibly durable. Their 4 arms allowed them superior weapon handling, and their compound eyes could detect movement across vast distances. They were the perfect soldiers, bred for conquest over millions of years of evolution. "Squad leaders report," Zexathara commanded, as his troops filed out of the transport. The jungle around them was eerily quiet, with only the occasional chirp of what seemed to be small birds or insects. The air was thick and humid, filled with the rich scent of vegetation and earth. "Perimeter secure, Commander," reported Lieutenant Vexdun, his plasma rifle scanning the tree line. "No signs of intelligent life. Sensors detect only basic animal signatures and plant matter." The Caltherians began setting up their base camp with military precision. Defensive barriers were erected, sensor arrays deployed, and communication equipment established. Within 2 hours, they had created a fortified position that could withstand assault from any known military force in the galaxy. But as the twin suns began to set, casting long shadows through the jungle canopy, something changed. The sounds of the forest grew quieter, then stopped altogether. Even the ever-present buzz of insects faded to nothing. "Commander," whispered Sergeant Klexmora, pointing toward the jungle edge. "Movement in the trees." Zexathara raised his rifle and activated his armor's enhanced vision. At first he saw nothing unusual, just the massive tree trunks, some easily 30 feet in diameter, standing like silent sentinels in the growing darkness. Thick vines hung between them, creating natural curtains of vegetation. Then he saw it. One of the trees had moved. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Zexathara's warrior instincts were finely tuned. The tree had shifted position by perhaps a foot, its massive trunk rotating slightly to face their camp. He blinked his compound eyes, certain he was mistaken. Trees didn't move. "False alarm," reported Sergeant Klexmora after a moment. "Just shadows and wind." But there was no wind. The jungle air was completely still. As night fell, the Caltherians activated their camp's defensive lighting system, casting harsh white beams into the surrounding forest. The light revealed the same dense wall of vegetation they had observed during landing. Massive trees, thick undergrowth, hanging vines. Everything appeared normal. The first watch passed without incident. The second shift reported a few minor disturbances, sounds that could have been animals moving through the underbrush. By the third watch, several soldiers began reporting that they felt like they were being watched, though their sensors detected nothing unusual. "Sir," Private Tex Clan approached Zexathara's command tent as dawn approached. Something's wrong with the perimeter sensors on the eastern side. They keep detecting movement, but when we investigate, there's nothing there. Zexathara reviewed the sensor logs on his portable command unit. The data showed multiple large objects moving at the edge of their detection range, but the movement patterns were strange. Too slow to be animals, too large to be anything but the massive trees themselves. Calibration error, he decided. The dense vegetation is probably interfering with our equipment. We'll run diagnostics after sunrise. But when the first sun crested the horizon, bringing dim light to the jungle floor, Private Tex Clan made a discovery that chilled every warrior in the camp. The trees had moved, not just shifted or swayed, but actually relocated. Trees that had been 50 yards from the perimeter were now 30 yards away. The massive trunk that Sergeant Klexamora had used as a landmark during her watch was now positioned completely differently, though she swore she had been watching it all night. "This is impossible," muttered Lieutenant Vex Dunn, checking and rechecking his measurements. "Trees don't move. These readings must be wrong." But as they watched throughout the morning, the evidence became undeniable. The jungle around them was slowly, imperceptibly contracting. The massive trees were repositioning themselves, creeping closer to the Caltherian camp with each passing hour. The movement was so gradual that it was nearly impossible to detect in real time, but when measured over hours, the displacement was obvious. "Commander," reported the communications officer, his voice tight with concern. "I'm having trouble reaching the orbiting fleet. Something is interfering with our signal." Zexathara looked up through the canopy. Where before there had been gaps between the leaves allowing glimpses of sky, now there was only an unbroken ceiling of green. The trees had grown taller, their branches intertwining to block all view of the space above. "Impossible," he repeated Lieutenant Vex Dunn's earlier statement. "Plants can't move that quickly." But as he spoke, he noticed something that made his 4 hearts skip a beat. The massive tree trunk directly in front of him had a pattern in its bark that looked disturbingly like a face. Not carved or natural formation, but actual features, eyes that seemed to follow his movement. A mouth twisted in what might have been either a smile or a snarl. "Sir," Sergeant Klexamora's voice was barely a whisper. "The trees, they have faces." Every Caltherian in the camp slowly turned to examine the forest around them. Now that they knew what to look for, it was impossible to miss. Every massive trunk bore features that resembled faces, though they were alien and disturbing beyond description. Some appeared ancient and wise, others fierce and predatory. All of them seemed to be watching the invaders with intelligence that was definitely not plant-like. The jungle had been studying them since they landed. "Fall back to the transport," Zexathara commanded, his military training overriding his confusion. "Prepare for immediate departure." But as his warriors rushed toward their landing ship, they discovered something that filled them with terror. The transport was gone. Not destroyed or damaged, but simply absent. The clearing where they had landed now contained only more massive trees, as if the landing site had never existed at all. The jungle had erased all trace of their arrival. "This isn't possible," Lieutenant Vex Dunn said, his voice rising in pitch. "We landed right here. The ship was right here." But the evidence of their eyes was undeniable. They were surrounded by an unbroken wall of massive, living trees that watched them with alien intelligence. The Caltherian Empire's elite warriors, conquerors of 3,000 worlds, found themselves trapped in a jungle that was far more than it appeared. As the reality of their situation sank in, the faces in the tree bark began to change expression. What had appeared to be neutral observation now looked distinctly predatory. The jungle around them began to emit a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. A heartbeat, The planet was alive, and it was hungry. The greatest military force in the known galaxy had just learned that sometimes the trees fight back. The Galactic Empire. Thought the jungle was just trees. Part 2. The Caltherian warriors formed a defensive circle as the jungle's heartbeat grew louder and more threatening. Commander Zexathara tried to maintain control over his troops, but he could see fear creeping into their compound eyes. These were soldiers who had faced plasma cannons and particle beam weapons without flinching, yet the sight of trees with watching faces was breaking their resolve. "Establish communications with any ship in orbit," he ordered his communications specialist. "Emergency evacuation protocol." "Sir, I cannot penetrate whatever is blocking our signals," the specialist replied, sweat beading on his exoskeleton despite his training. "It's like the entire atmosphere has become a jamming field." As if responding to their conversation, the faces in the trees began to move. Not just expression changes, but actual mouth movements, as though they were speaking in a language too low for Caltherian ears to detect. The ground beneath their feet started to vibrate with the rhythm of massive communication flowing between the tree entities. Sergeant Kleximora approached one of the smaller trees at the edge of their perimeter, her plasma rifle trained on its bark-covered face. "Commander, what are your orders? Do we engage?" Before Zexathara could respond, the tree she was threatening suddenly moved with shocking speed. A massive branch, thick as a Caltherian torso, swept down and knocked the weapon from her 4 hands. The movement was so quick that their enhanced reflexes barely registered it happening. But the tree didn't attack her. It simply disarmed her and returned to its previous position, the face in its bark now showing what appeared to be amusement. "They're toying with us," Lieutenant Vexdune observed, his voice hollow with disbelief. "These things are intelligent, and they're playing with us like we're children." The realization hit the entire squad simultaneously. They weren't facing trees that had somehow become animated. They were confronting beings that had been disguised as trees, perhaps for centuries or millennia. The jungle wasn't inhabited by intelligent life. It was intelligent life. As the second sun reached its zenith, casting strange patterns of light through the now complete canopy overhead, the trees began to move more openly. Massive trunks rotated to face the trapped warriors. Root systems shifted beneath the ground, causing the earth to ripple like water, and branches reached toward each other to form intricate patterns overhead. "Look at the ground," whispered Private TexClan. The forest floor was changing. What had appeared to be random undergrowth and fallen logs was revealing itself to be something far more sophisticated. Patterns emerged in the vegetation, geometric designs that spoke of intelligence and purpose. The entire jungle floor was arranged in complex mandalas and spirals that stretched as far as they could see. The Caltherians were standing in the middle of a vast, living cathedral. "Commander," the communications specialist called out, his voice trembling, "I'm picking up something. It's not our fleet, but there's definitely a signal coming through." The sound that emerged from their equipment was unlike anything in the Caltherian database. It was musical, complex, with harmonies that seemed to resonate in their bones. But underneath the melody was something recognizable: mathematics. The signal contained numerical sequences, prime numbers, geometric ratios, universal concepts that any intelligent species would understand. The jungle was trying to communicate with them. "It's a language," Zexathara realized. "They're attempting to establish communication protocols." Over the next several hours, the tree entities continued their efforts to communicate. The mathematical signals grew more complex, incorporating stellar positions, chemical formulas, and what appeared to be historical data. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of what they were dealing with. The beings called themselves the Verdani, and they had been the guardians of this world for over 50,000 years. They were not originally from this planet, but had arrived as refugees from a cosmic disaster that destroyed their home system. Like the Caltharians, they had once possessed advanced technology and spacefaring capabilities. But unlike the Caltharians, who used their technology to conquer and dominate, the Verdani had chosen a different path. They had integrated themselves with the ecosystem of their new world, becoming symbiotic with the planet itself. Their consciousness had merged with the forest. Their technology had become biological. Their society had become an extension of the natural world. "They're trying to tell us something about other visitors," the communications specialist reported as he worked to decode more of the signal. "There have been other races that attempted to colonize this world, many other races." The tree entities began to show them evidence of previous invasions. The ground opened in several places, revealing artifacts buried beneath the forest floor. Weapons, armor, and technology from dozens of different species, all in various states of decay and integration with the plant matter. Some of the artifacts were clearly Caltharian in origin, though ancient beyond anything in their current historical records. Others belonged to species that the Caltharians had conquered, races they thought they had completely eliminated from the galaxy. "How many?" Zexathara asked, though he wasn't sure if the tree entities could understand spoken language. The answer came not in words, but in a vision that somehow appeared directly in their minds. Hundreds of invasion forces, spanning thousands of years. All had come to this world expecting to find an easy conquest. All had discovered that the jungle was far more than it appeared. Some had been destroyed, others had been absorbed into the forest ecosystem, and a few had chosen to join the Verdani voluntarily. The vision showed what happened to those who chose violence. The jungle could move in ways that defied understanding. Trees could relocate themselves across vast distances in moments when necessary. The forest floor could open into chasms or rise into mountains. The very air could become toxic to specific species while remaining harmless to others. Weather patterns could be controlled and directed with surgical precision. But the vision also showed what happened to those who chose cooperation. They were welcomed into the Verdani collective, their knowledge and culture preserved and cherished. They became part of something greater than themselves, contributing to a society that had achieved perfect harmony with its environment. "They're offering us a choice," Lieutenant Vexdun said, his voice filled with wonder. "Join them or leave." But even as the offer was made clear, the Caltharian warriors knew that leaving wasn't really an option. Their transport was gone, their communications were blocked, and they were completely surrounded by beings whose power they had only begun to comprehend. More disturbing than their tactical situation was the growing realization that the Verdani knew everything about the Caltharian Empire. Through their integration with the planetary ecosystem, they had access to information sources that spanned the galaxy. They knew about every world the Caltharians had conquered, every species they had eliminated, every atrocity they had committed in the name of expansion. The jungle had been watching the Caltharian Empire for centuries, waiting for the day when their expansion would inevitably bring them to this world. "This was planned," Zexathara said, the full scope of their situation becoming clear. "They've been waiting for us specifically." The faces in the trees confirmed his suspicion with expressions that showed ancient patience finally reaching fruition. The Verdani had spent decades preparing for the arrival of Caltharian forces, studying their tactics, understanding their technology, and developing countermeasures for every possible strategy. The Caltharian Empire had walked into a trap that had been 50 years in the making. As the day progressed, the tree entities made their expectations clear. The warriors could surrender their weapons and submit to integration into the Verdani collective, or they could attempt to fight and face the consequences. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, and no escape. But the Caltharians were warriors bred for conquest. Even facing impossible odds and incomprehensible enemies, Their training and instincts demanded that they fight. Surrender was not in their genetic programming. "Prepare for combat," Commander Zexathera ordered, knowing even as he spoke that he was likely ordering the deaths of every soldier under his command. "We are Caltherians. We do not bow to trees." The faces in the trees showed what might have been disappointment, as if they had hoped for a different choice. Then, with movements too fast for the eye to follow, the jungle began to hunt the greatest warriors in the known galaxy. The Galactic Empire. Thought the jungle was just trees. Part 3. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic military history. The Caltherian warriors, trained to fight conventional enemies with predictable tactics, found themselves facing an opponent that redefined the very concept of warfare. The jungle attacked from every direction simultaneously. Vines shot from the canopy with the speed of plasma bolts, wrapping around weapons and limbs. Tree roots erupted from the ground like serpents, creating barriers and traps that appeared and disappeared with bewildering speed. The forest floor itself became a weapon, opening into pits beneath running soldiers and rising into walls that blocked their plasma fire. "Spread formation!" Commander Zexathera shouted, firing his rifle at a massive tree that was advancing on their position. The plasma beam struck the bark and was absorbed harmlessly, as if the tree's surface was designed specifically to counter their energy weapons. Sergeant Klex Mora discovered that physical attacks were equally useless. Her combat knife, forged from the strongest materials in Caltherian space, bounced off tree bark like it was striking solid metal. But when she tried to retreat, gentle branches guided her away from danger with almost protective care. "Sir," Lieutenant Vexdun called out from across the battlefield, "they're not trying to kill us. Every attack is non-lethal." The realization was both comforting and terrifying. The Verdani could clearly destroy them with ease, but they were choosing to capture rather than eliminate. The jungle was hunting them like a predator playing with prey, but with the ultimate goal of preservation rather than destruction. Private Texclan found himself wrapped in vines that held him suspended 3 feet off the ground. He struggled briefly, then stopped when he realized that the more he fought, the tighter the vines became. When he relaxed, they loosened slightly, allowing him to breathe more easily but not escape. "They want us alive," he called out to his squad mates. "They're trying to capture us intact." The battle continued for hours, but it was clear from the beginning that the Caltherians had no chance of victory. Every tactic they employed was countered by the jungle's impossible abilities. Energy weapons were absorbed or deflected. Explosive devices were smothered by rapidly growing vegetation before they could detonate. Even their combat armor proved useless, as vines found every joint and weakness with surgical precision. One by one, the elite warriors of the Caltherian Empire were captured by an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. As the last free soldier was wrapped in restraining vegetation, Commander Zexathera found himself face-to-face with the largest tree in the area. The face in its bark was ancient beyond measurement, with eyes that held wisdom accumulated over millennia of existence. When it spoke, the words somehow appeared directly in his mind, translated into perfect Caltherian despite originating from a completely alien consciousness. "You fought well," the entity communicated. "Your species is known throughout this sector for its military prowess. But prowess in destruction is not the same as wisdom in survival." "What do you want from us?" Zexathera demanded, though his position hanging from branch restraints made his defiance seem childish, rather than threatening. "We want to show you what your empire has been missing," the ancient Verdani replied. "You conquer worlds to strip them of resources and add them to your territory, but you never truly understand what you are destroying." The jungle around them began to change, revealing hidden structures that had been disguised as natural formations. What appeared to be hillsides opened to reveal vast underground cities where thousands of different species lived in harmony. Former invaders from across the galaxy had found new purpose as part of the Verdani Collective, contributing their unique knowledge and perspectives to a society that celebrated diversity rather than destroying it. "Every species you have eliminated," the Verdani explained, "we have preserved here. Their cultures, their knowledge, their genetic heritage. What your empire calls conquest, we call rescue." Zexathara watched in amazement as beings he recognized from ancient Caltherian battle records moved freely through the underground cities. Species that the Empire had wiped out centuries ago were not only alive but thriving, their technologies and arts integrated into the Verdani's biomechanical civilization. "The galaxy believes we destroyed them," he said, understanding beginning to dawn. "The galaxy believes many things that are not true," the Verdani replied. "Your empire expands across space, leaving dead worlds in its wake. We expand through time, preserving life wherever we encounter it. Which of us truly serves the future?" Over the following days, the captured Caltherians were given tours of the Verdani Society. They saw technology that made their own weapons and ships seem primitive by comparison, but all of it was biological, grown rather than manufactured. They witnessed art forms that incorporated the creative expressions of hundreds of different species, creating beauty beyond anything they had previously imagined. Most importantly, they met the preserved members of species they had personally helped to eliminate. Warriors who had fought against Caltherian expansion were now teachers, scientists, and artists in the Verdani Collective. Children of races that no longer existed in the galaxy continued their ancestors' traditions in this hidden sanctuary. "How is this possible?" Lieutenant Vexdun asked one of the Verdani guides, a being that appeared to be a fusion of plant and animal characteristics from at least a dozen different evolutionary paths. "We do not conquer," the guide explained. "We invite. When a species faces extinction, whether from natural disaster or imperial expansion, we offer them sanctuary. Some choose to join us immediately. Others, like your people, require more persuasion." "What happens to those who refuse?" Sergeant Klexamora wanted to know. "They are allowed to leave if they promise never to return or reveal our location," the guide said. "Most choose to stay once they understand what we offer. A chance to be part of something greater than conquest and destruction." The Caltherian warriors were given time to consider their options. They could return to their empire and continue their careers as conquerors, though they would be sworn to secrecy about the Verdani. They could attempt to reform the Caltherian military from within, using their knowledge of alternatives to wholesale destruction. Or they could join the collective and help preserve the cultures that their empire continued to eliminate. Commander Zexathara found the decision more difficult than he had expected. His entire life had been dedicated to Caltherian expansion and military glory. The idea of abandoning his people and his civilization was almost inconceivable. But he had also seen the results of Caltherian conquest from the perspective of the conquered for the first time. The species they had eliminated were not primitive or deserving of destruction. They had simply been different, and in the Caltherian Empire, difference was not tolerated. "What about our families?" Private Tech's clan asked during one of their discussion sessions. "Our clans and bloodlines?" "They can join you here if they choose," the Verdani replied. "We have rescued entire family groups before, but the choice must be made freely, without coercion." As their time in the jungle sanctuary extended, the Caltherian warriors began to change. Exposure to the preserved cultures of their former enemies gave them perspectives they had never considered. They began to understand that strength could be measured in ways other than military conquest, and that survival sometimes required adaptation rather than domination. One by one, they made their choices. Lieutenant Vexadun chose to return to the Empire, carrying the secret knowledge of the Verdani and hoping to influence Caltherian policy from within the military hierarchy. Sergeant Klex Mora decided to join the collective, bringing her tactical knowledge to help protect other endangered species. Private Texclan chose to leave the jungle and search for his scattered family, hoping to convince them to abandon the Empire voluntarily. Commander Zexthara made the most difficult choice of all. He requested permission to return to the Caltherian fleet, not to resume his career, but to sabotage future invasion forces. The Verdani granted his request, but warned him that such a path would likely lead to his discovery and execution by his own people. "Better to die preserving life than to live destroying it," he replied. As the Caltherians prepared to leave the jungle sanctuary, they were given one final gift. The Verdani shared with them a vision of what the galaxy could become if cooperation replaced conquest, if diversity was celebrated rather than eliminated, if species worked together rather than fighting for dominance. It was a vision of a galaxy where the jungle's philosophy of preservation and integration had spread to every world, where former enemies became collaborators in building something greater than any empire. The last thing Commander Zexthara saw as he departed the hidden sanctuary was the face in the ancient tree, watching him with eyes that held both hope and patient determination. The Verdani had been preserving life for 50,000 years, and they would continue their work for 50,000 more if necessary. But now they had allies within the greatest military force in the known galaxy. The jungle that had been dismissed as just trees was about to teach the Caltherian Empire that sometimes the hunted becomes the hunter, and sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when not to fight at all. The galaxy would never be the same.